He was a pretty serious guy, quiet, not one of these loud, rambunctious coaches on the sideline. Very reasonable. I'll get a little technical here. He was one of the few coaches who coached the zone defense full-time. In lacrosse, you typically only play zone defense when you're a man down, when there's a penalty, when there's been a penalty. We played it full-time. Whether that was the right thing to do or not, I don't know. I think he was a motivator. He really got us thinking that we could basically do anything.
Avery Blake really was a great guy. He was a very dignified man, and he was a very sloppy dresser. And he wore raggedy old sweat clothes, and his wife used to despair at this. And one of our teammates called him the best dressed coach in the Ivy League. Of course, that was a sarcastic remark. He was a very dignified guy. He was a good coach. He cared a great deal about his players. And when we would do crazy stuff, he would wince, but he wouldn't scream or holler. And so all in all, I would say that Avery Blake was one of the great experiences of my Penn career.
He was a quality human being. When we got him, he had been to Swarthmore for many years, and he was a successful coach there. Before he became our head coach, the head coach had never played lacrosse. He was a football player who they drafted to be the lacrosse coach. And he was a very nice fellow, but didn't know anything about the game. At least Ave knew the game. So he made us a lot better. And when his term here ended, I sat on the committee to select a coach to replace him. There's only 3 of us in the room making the decision of his replacement, and he was one of the 3. So he helped. He was such a quality human being, and he actually helped find a replacement for himself, even though he wasn't willingly leaving.
But to me, I always remember him in terms of what kind of man he was. Fact of the matter is, I've had to come to grips over the years with the fact that I was one of the players that sort of led a revolt as to Coach Blake. And I had been a recruit, and we were not playing up to our ability. And a lot of it was on us, and some of it was on him. And I was one of those players that the athletic department heard from about how we needed to make a change. And I think he eventually heard that. And yet, right after my junior year at Penn, we were playing down at Hopkins. And after I left the game at Johns Hopkins, which we lost, they were the national champions that year, I had to go visit my father at the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and then I realized he was very sick. And to make a long story short, when I came home after my junior year, I realized my father was dying. And he died in August, just before I came back here. And I contacted Mr. Blake to tell him I didn't know what was going to happen my senior year. My mother was a private school kindergarten teacher. Money was an issue, and I was going to have to work part-time and try to get through my last year. I really wasn't sure if I could play lacrosse because I was going to have to work. And he knew full well that I'd been one of the players that led the revolt, and yet he stepped up for me. He got me a job on campus that only football and basketball players got. I don't know how it is at Penn now, but the football guys and the basketball guys got all the great prime jobs on campus. Well, suddenly I was with all those guys, and I had a phenomenal job. I had more money in my pocket my senior year than I did before my dad died because Mr. Blake looked out for me. And I realized what a class man he was, that he didn't hold it against me. And I've never forgotten that. And I feel like I really stepped up my senior year and did pretty well in some key games, and he'd give me a look and nod, and I'd nod back to him. And I realized that we sort of bonded there at the end after some tougher times during my years here. So I remember him more as a man, and a man of huge character, than I do as a coach. He was a good coach, but what a marvelous human being he was.